Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the wide window of Luna Station and watched the alien ships arrive. The vessels looked like nothing humans had ever built. They were smooth and white, shaped like teardrops made of crystal. Light seemed to flow through their hulls like water through glass. Each ship was bigger than Earth's largest city. Sarah had been waiting for this day for 3 years. Everyone knew it would come eventually. The hegemony of 9 worlds visited every new species when they became advanced enough to travel between stars. They always brought the same message: submit or face the consequences. The docking bay filled with strange sounds as the alien ships connected to the station. Sarah smoothed her blue diplomatic uniform and checked her appearance one last time. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat style. Her dark eyes looked calm, but inside she felt her heart beating fast. The doors to the meeting chamber opened with a soft hiss. The aliens walked in, and Sarah had to remind herself not to stare. She had seen pictures and videos, but seeing them in person was different. The leader was a Vorthak named Zethmiran. His body was made of living crystal that changed colors as he moved. Blue light flowed through him like blood through veins. He was tall, at least 8 feet, and his voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. Behind him came representatives from the other member worlds of the hegemony. There was a Threx, looking like a giant insect made of silver metal. A Caltheran floated in a tank of green liquid, its tentacles moving in slow patterns. Others followed, each stranger than the last. Sarah bowed slightly as she had been taught. "Welcome to Luna Station. I am Ambassador Sarah Chen, speaking for the people of Earth and all human colonies." Zethmiran's crystal form flickered with what might have been amusement. "Ambassador Chen, we are the Hegemony Council. We come with an offer of membership in our great alliance." Sarah nodded and gestured to the conference table. It had taken weeks to design chairs that would work for all the different alien body types. "Please, let us sit and discuss this offer." As they settled around the table, Zethmiran activated a holographic display. Images of planets and star systems filled the air above them. For 20,000 years, the hegemony has brought order to this galaxy. We have ended wars between species. We have managed resources fairly. We have prevented the chaos that comes when young species try to expand too quickly. The images showed peaceful worlds, beautiful cities, and happy alien citizens. Sarah watched carefully, but she noticed something. All the aliens in the pictures looked the same. There were no mixed groups, no variety. Everything was neat and ordered and identical. "The benefits of membership are many," continued Zethmiran. "Protection from hostile species, access to advanced technology, trade partnerships that will make your people wealthy. All we ask in return is reasonable cooperation." Sarah leaned forward. "What kind of cooperation?" The crystal being's light dimmed slightly. "Resource quotas, of course. Your worlds produce certain materials we need. Population controls to prevent overgrowth. Cultural guidelines to maintain social harmony. Standard requirements for all member species." "Cultural guidelines? Nothing harsh," said the Threx representative, its voice buzzing like machinery. "Simply restrictions on aggressive art forms, competitive sports, and other activities that promote conflict. We find that peaceful species are happier species." Sarah kept her face calm, but inside she felt cold. She had read the reports from other worlds that had joined the hegemony. The cultural guidelines meant the end of most human music, literature, sports, and entertainment. The population controls meant that families could no longer choose how many children to have. The resource quotas meant strip mining Earth's most beautiful places. I see, she said carefully. And if we choose not to accept membership? Zethmirin's crystal form flashed bright red for a moment. That would be unfortunate. Young species sometimes make poor choices when they do not understand the bigger picture. We would need to take corrective measures to protect galactic stability. The holographic display changed. Now it showed images of dead worlds, burned cities, empty space where planets used to be. The message was clear. How long do we have to decide? Sarah asked. 48 hours should be sufficient, said the Caltheran, its voice bubbling through the liquid in its tank. We understand this is a significant decision, but the choice is simple. Join us and prosper, or face the consequences of defiance. Sarah stood up. Thank you for your generous offer. I will need to consult with my government. Zethmirin rose. As well, his crystal body chiming softly. Of course. We will wait for your answer. But understand, Ambassador Chen, that no species has ever refused membership in the hegemony. The galaxy is a dangerous place for those who stand alone. After the aliens left, Sarah remained in the conference room for a long time. She stared out at the stars and thought about Earth, about children playing in parks, about musicians creating new songs, about athletes pushing the limits of human ability, about families choosing their own futures. She thought about the report hidden in her desk drawer, the one that detailed humanity's secret preparations for this exact moment. For 3 years, human agents had been making contact with other species. They had learned about the hegemony's methods. They had discovered that many worlds wanted to rebel, but were too afraid to try alone. Sarah activated her secure communication system. The faces of leaders from across human space appeared on her screen. President Martinez from Earth, Director Kim from the Mars colonies, Admiral Thompson from the Outer System Defense Force. They made their offer, Sarah said simply, and asked, President Martinez, exactly what we expected, complete submission or total destruction. Admiral Thompson leaned forward. Are our people ready? Sarah nodded. The networks are in place. Our allies are standing by. Everyone knows their part. Then, we proceed with the plan, said Director Kim. Are we sure about this? Asked President Martinez. Once we say no, there's no going back. Sarah looked out at the alien ships waiting in space. Beautiful and terrible and utterly confident that humanity would bow down like every other species before them. We've been preparing for this moment since we first learned about the hegemony, she said. We've studied their tactics. We know their weaknesses, and we've built something they don't understand. What's that? Asked Admiral Thompson. Hope, Sarah replied. We've given hope to species that had forgotten what it meant to be free. Tomorrow, when I give them our answer, every oppressed world in the galaxy will be watching. Every slave species will be listening. Every conquered people will be holding their breath. She turned back to the screen. The question isn't whether we're ready to say no. The question is whether the galaxy is ready to be free. The communication ended, and Sarah was alone with the stars. In 46 hours, she would walk back into that conference room. She would look at beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia, and she would speak a word that would change everything. Outside, the alien ships waited in their perfect formation, confident in their power. They had no idea that across human space, secret messages were being sent, weapons were being prepared, alliances were being activated. The hegemony had made the same mistake that every tyrant in history had made. They had forgotten that the oppressed always outnumber the oppressors. They just needed someone to remind them of that fact. Sarah Chen smiled as she watched the stars. Tomorrow, the galaxy would remember what freedom meant. 48 hours later, Ambassador Sarah Chen walked back into the conference room. This time, she was not alone. Camera drones floated silently in the corners, broadcasting to every human world and colony. Hidden transmitters would carry the signal even further to species across the galaxy who had been waiting for this moment. The hegemony representatives were already seated around the table. Zethmiran's crystal body glowed with confident blue light. The other aliens looked relaxed, almost bored. They had done this same meeting thousands of times before. The result was always the same. "Ambassador Chen," Zethmiran said, his voice chiming softly. "We trust you have reached the correct decision." Sarah walked to her chair but did not sit down. Instead, she stood behind it, her hands resting on the back. "We have indeed reached a decision." "Excellent," buzzed the Threx representative. "The submission documents are ready for your signature. Once you accept membership, we can begin the transition process immediately." Sarah looked directly at Zethmiran. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. We have not come here to submit." The crystal being's light flickered. "I'm sorry?" "We have reviewed your offer carefully," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong. "We have considered the benefits of membership. We have studied the requirements and restrictions. We have examined the fate of other species who have joined your hegemony." The Kaltharan's tentacles moved faster in its tank. "And you have seen the wisdom of cooperation, yes?" Sarah shook her head. "No. We have seen what you really are. You are not protectors. You are conquerors. You do not bring peace. You bring slavery with a prettier name." Zethmiran's crystal form flashed bright red. "Ambassador Chen, I think you misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. This is an offer of mercy." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied. "You have given us a choice, submit or die. You expect us to be afraid. You expect us to bow down like every other species has done." She paused and looked directly into the nearest camera. Across the galaxy, beings on 1,000 worlds held their breath. "Our answer is no." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. The alien representatives stared at Sarah as if she had spoken in a language they did not understand. No species had ever simply refused. Not once in 20,000 years. Zethmiran was the first to recover. His crystal body blazed with angry red light. "No? Did you say no?" "Yes," Sarah said calmly. "No, we will not submit. No, we will not accept your terms. No, we will not bow down to tyrants and call it peace." The Threx representative made a sound, like grinding metal. "You do not understand what you are saying. Our fleets will reduce your worlds to ash. Your species will be extinct within a month." Sarah smiled. "You are welcome to try," she gestured to the camera drones. "But before you make that decision, there are some things you should know. You see, we have been busy during these 3 years, since first contact. We have been learning. We have been preparing. Most importantly, we have been talking." The holographic display in the center of the table activated, but instead of showing hegemony propaganda, it now displayed star maps marked with human symbols. "While you assumed we were just another primitive species waiting to be conquered, we were building something you cannot understand. We were making friends." The star map zoomed in on different systems. The Kethri rebels in the Andorian sector, the underground resistance on former Threx worlds, the hidden colonies of species you thought you had eliminated. Did you really think they would stay hidden forever? Zethmiran's light dimmed. Impossible. We monitor all communications. We control all trade routes. You control the communications you know about, Sarah said. But humans are very good at finding new ways to talk to each other. We shared our quantum entanglement technology with our new friends. Instantaneous communication across any distance, completely undetectable by your methods. The star map updated again, showing communication lines connecting dozens of systems. For 3 years, oppressed species across the galaxy have been coordinating, sharing technology, planning together, waiting for someone to say the word that would start the revolution. The Caltharan's tentacles writhed frantically. This changes nothing. Even together you are insects compared to our power. Sarah nodded to the display again. New images appeared, showing human shipyards and manufacturing facilities. Perhaps. But insects can bring down giants if there are enough of them, and we have been very busy building more insects. The images showed massive construction projects on human worlds, shipyards that had been hidden inside asteroids, weapons factories disguised as mining operations, fleet bases built in the empty space between stars. Every human colony has been preparing for this day, Sarah continued. Every human ship has been modified for war. Every human citizen knows their role in what comes next. And we are not alone. The display shifted to show alien ships with human modifications. Kethri vessels upgraded with human weapons. Altarian shields powered by human reactors. Ships from a dozen species working together with human designs. Zethmiran stood up, his crystal form now blazing with furious light. You think your pathetic alliance can stand against the hegemony? We have conquered 1,000 species. Our fleets have never known defeat. Your fleets have never faced anything like us, Sarah replied. You conquer through fear and isolation. You keep species apart so they cannot unite against you. But you made one critical mistake. What mistake? Demanded the Threx. You let us live long enough to make friends. Sarah stepped away from the table. The signal has already been sent. Every rebel cell, every resistance group, every hidden fleet across the galaxy now knows that someone finally said no to the hegemony. Right now, uprisings are beginning on 100 worlds. Your peaceful member species are remembering what freedom feels like. The Caltharan bubbled frantically. We will crush these rebellions. We will make examples of your worlds that will terrify the galaxy into submission. You can try, Sarah said, but here is what you do not understand about humans. We do not fight just to survive. We fight to win, and we have been planning to win for a very long time. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. We know about the slave worlds, the prison planets where you send anyone who speaks against you, the mining colonies where entire species work until they die. We know where they are, and we are coming for them. Zethmiran's voice rose to a screaming chime. We will destroy you. Every human world will burn. Every human ship will be space dust. Sarah paused at the door. Maybe, but even if you kill every human in the galaxy, it will not matter. Because we have already done something you cannot undo. We have given hope to the hopeless. We have reminded the galaxy that tyrants can be defeated, and that idea once planted can never be destroyed. She looked back at the alien representatives one last time. The word has been spoken. The choice has been made. What happens next is up to you. But understand this: the galaxy will never be the same. Sarah Chen walked out of the conference room, leaving the hegemony representatives staring at each other in shock and fury. Behind her, the camera drones continued to broadcast to the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, in hidden bases and secret meetings, oppressed beings heard the word that changed everything. A simple word that carried the weight of every species that had ever dreamed of freedom. No. The revolution had begun. In the depths of space, human ships moved toward their positions. On distant worlds, alien rebels prepared their weapons. In the council chambers of the hegemony, alarms began to sound as reports flooded in from across their empire. Species that had been silent for centuries were speaking. Worlds that had been peaceful for millennia were in revolt. The galaxy that had been ordered and controlled for 20,000 years was waking up, and it all started with a single word, spoken by a human woman who refused to bow down to tyrants. The hegemony had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten something important. Fear only works as long as people believe they have no choice. Humanity had just reminded the galaxy that there is always a choice. The word that shook stars echoed across space and time, carrying with it the promise of freedom and the possibility of a better tomorrow. The oppressed had found their voice, and it spoke with one word: no. The news traveled faster than light itself. Across the galaxy, beings who had lived their entire lives under hegemony rule watched the broadcast in stunned silence. On the crystal mines of Vorthak Prime, slave workers stopped their digging to stare at hidden screens. In the factory cities of the Threx worlds, workers whispered the impossible word to each other: no. Commander HFY crouched in the ruins of her homeworld's capital city. Around her, the remains of her people's civilization lay in broken heaps. The hegemony had destroyed everything beautiful about Kethri culture, but they had not destroyed the Kethri themselves. They had hidden in caves and abandoned cities, waiting for a chance to strike back. Now that chance had come. "Did you hear it?" asked her lieutenant, his scaled face showing excitement for the first time in years. "The humans actually said no." HFY nodded, her 4 arms checking her weapons one final time. "I heard it. The question is, are they ready to back up their words with action?" Her communication device buzzed with an incoming message. The signal was completely clear, transmitted through the quantum entanglement network the humans had shared. With them, the voice that spoke was calm and professional. "All rebel units, this is Admiral Thompson of the Human Defense Force. Operation Freedom begins in exactly 1 hour. Remember, we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every being in the galaxy who has been told they have no choice. Today, we give them back their choice." HFY smiled, showing teeth that could tear through metal. "I think they are ready." Meanwhile, in the gleaming towers of the hegemony capital world, panic was spreading like a virus. High Chancellor Zeth Miran stood in the central command chamber, watching status reports flood in from across the empire. Every screen showed the same impossible thing: rebellion. "How many worlds are reporting uprisings?" he demanded. The communications officer, a nervous Altarian, checked his instruments. 47 confirmed rebel activities, 63 more, reporting civil unrest. The numbers are growing every minute. "This is impossible!" Zeth Miran's crystal form blazed with angry light. "We have kept these species apart for millennia. They cannot coordinate on this scale." But they could, and they were. On the mining world of Zerion, the enslaved Delvac had seized control of the orbital platforms. On the agricultural planet Greenhold, the worker species had stopped all food. shipments to hegemony worlds. In the asteroid belts of the Outer Rim, hidden rebel fleets were emerging from concealment. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. This was not just a human rebellion. This was a galaxy-wide revolution that had been planned for years. "Sir," called another officer, "the Grand Fleet is ready to depart for the Sol system. Admiral Krexthar requests permission to begin the attack." Zethmaron turned toward the tactical display. The Grand Fleet was the pride of the hegemony. 1,000 ships, each one powerful enough to destroy an entire world. It had never been defeated in 20,000 years of warfare. "Permission granted," he said. "Destroy the human worlds. Make an example that will terrify the galaxy back into submission." But as the Grand Fleet moved toward human space, they found something unexpected waiting for them. The Sol system was not defenseless. It was ready. Admiral Sarah Thompson stood on the bridge of the human flagship Defiance, watching the approaching enemy fleet on her tactical display. Around her, officers from a dozen different species worked together at their stations. Humans, Kethri, Altarians, Delvac, and others who had chosen freedom over slavery. "Enemy fleet entering outer system," reported Commander Zhang from the sensor station. 1,000 ships, just as intelligence predicted. "Allied fleet status?" asked Thompson. "All units report ready," answered Lieutenant HFY, now serving as the alien liaison officer. 300 human ships, 200 rebel vessels, and 100 converted civilian craft. We are outnumbered 3-1. Thompson nodded. Those were not good odds, but they were better than the hegemony expected. The aliens thought they would face only primitive human ships. They had no idea that the rebels had been sharing technology for years. "Open a channel to all ships," Thompson ordered. The communication system activated, connecting her to every vessel in the defense fleet. Human faces mixed with alien features on her screen, all of them showing the same determination. "This is Admiral Thompson to all fleet units. Today, we fight not just for Earth or humanity, but for the idea that freedom is worth any sacrifice. The enemy believes they are facing another conquest. They are wrong. They are facing their own end." She paused, looking at the tactical display. The hegemony fleet was massive, but it was also predictable. They fought the same way they had for millennia, using overwhelming force and expecting quick surrender. Remember your training. Trust your allies. Fight with courage, but fight smart. We do not need to destroy their entire fleet. We just need to prove that they can be beaten. Once the galaxy sees that the hegemony can lose, their empire will crumble from within. The enemy fleet came on like a wave of destruction. Their ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charging with deadly energy. At their head flew the flagship of Admiral Krexthar, a massive crystal vessel that gleamed like a deadly star. "All ships, engage at will," Thompson ordered. The battle began with a flash of light that could be seen from Earth. Human ships darted between the larger enemy vessels like angry bees, their modified weapons striking at weak points the rebels had identified years ago. Kethri fighters used their natural agility to dodge enemy fire while launching devastating attacks. Altarian shield ships protected the smaller vessels while heavy human cruisers traded fire with enemy battleships. But the real surprise came when the first hegemony ship tried to retreat. Human boarding pods launched from converted cargo ships, carrying assault teams trained for this exact mission. Within minutes, they had captured the enemy vessel and turned its weapons against its former allies. "Impossible!" Admiral Krexthar's voice crackled over the communications. "You are primitives. You cannot match our technology." Thompson opened a channel to the enemy flagship. "You are right, Admiral. We cannot match your technology, but we have something you lost long ago. We have something to fight for." The battle raged for hours. The hegemony fleet was powerful, but it was built for intimidation, not for fighting enemies who refused to surrender. Their tactics were outdated, designed for crushing helpless worlds, not for facing a coordinated defense. Slowly, impossibly, The human alliance began to win. Enemy ships fell or were captured faster than they could be replaced. The perfect hegemony formation broke apart as ships fled or switched sides. On Vorthak Prime, the slave workers in the crystal mines heard the news of the battle over hidden transmitters. For the first time in their lives, they heard that the hegemony fleet was losing. A cheer went up from the mines that could be heard across the planet. On the factory worlds, production stopped as workers declared strikes. On the agricultural planets, food shipments to hegemony worlds ended. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The humans were winning. But the real moment came when Admiral Krexthar's flagship, damaged and surrounded, tried to escape. Human and Kethri ships working together managed to disable its engines. Boarding teams swarmed aboard, and within an hour, the pride of the hegemony fleet was flying under rebel colors. "This is Admiral Thompson to all hegemony forces," she broadcast from the captured flagship. "Your fleet is defeated. Your admiral is captured. Your empire is crumbling. You have a choice to make. Surrender now and face justice, or continue fighting and share the fate of your flagship." One by one, the remaining hegemony ships powered down their weapons. Some tried to flee, but they were pursued by rebel vessels across the galaxy. Others surrendered immediately, their crews realizing that the age of hegemony dominance was over. As news of the victory spread, uprisings exploded across the galaxy. The hegemony had ruled through fear, but fear only works as long as the threat seems unstoppable. Once beings saw that the hegemony could be defeated, that fear turned into rage. On world after world, the oppressed rose up against their oppressors. The hegemony's own member species began to turn against their government. The careful order that had been maintained for 20,000 years collapsed in a matter of days. High Chancellor Zeth Miran stood in his command chamber, watching his empire die on the tactical displays. Reports flooded in of worlds declaring independence, fleets defecting to the rebels, and government officials fleeing their posts. "How?" he whispered to himself. "How did it all fall apart so quickly?" But he knew the answer. The hegemony had built their empire on a lie, that resistance was futile, that freedom was impossible, that submission was the only choice. The humans had proven that lie false with a single word: no. And once that word was spoken, once beings across the galaxy remembered that they had a choice. Nothing could stop the tide of freedom that followed. The galaxy had held its breath when humanity defied the hegemony. Now it exhaled in a great sigh of relief as the age of tyranny came to an end. The revolution had begun with one species refusing to submit, but it would end with every species in the galaxy choosing freedom over slavery, hope over fear, and the right to determine their own destiny. The word that started it all still echoed across the stars: no. And in its wake came something the galaxy had not seen for 20,000 years, the dawn of a new age of freedom. Admiral Sarah Thompson stood on the bridge of the captured hegemony flagship and watched the galaxy tear itself apart. On every screen, status reports showed the same story: rebellion, defection, and the collapse of 20,000 years of order. But she knew the war was far from over. "Admiral," called Commander Zhang from the tactical station, "long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements from the core worlds. It looks like the hegemony is pulling back all their remaining forces." Thompson nodded grimly. She had expected this. The victory at Sol had been devastating, but it was only the beginning. The hegemony still controlled their core worlds and their most powerful fleets. When cornered, even tyrants could be dangerous. "How many ships are we looking at?" she asked. "At least 5,000 vessels, possibly more. They are gathering at the Nexus Point, right at the heart of their territory. The Nexus Point." Thompson had studied the strategic maps for months. It was the most heavily defended location in hegemony space, a massive artificial structure that controlled the main trade routes through the galaxy. If the rebels could take it, they would control galactic commerce. If they failed, the hegemony could use it as a base to retake everything they had lost. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant HFY from her position at the communications console, "we are receiving reports from rebel cells across the galaxy. The hegemony is pulling their occupation forces back to defend the core worlds. Hundreds of systems are declaring independence." Thompson felt a moment of satisfaction, but it was mixed with worry. "And what about the punishment fleets?" HFY's scaled face darkened. "Confirmed reports from 17 worlds. The hegemony is making examples." Thompson closed her eyes for a moment. She had feared this would happen. As their empire crumbled, the hegemony was lashing out at civilian populations. Worlds that had declared independence were being bombed from orbit. Entire species were being marked for extermination. "Open a channel to all rebel commanders," she ordered. Within minutes, the holographic display showed dozens of faces from across the galaxy. Human admirals, HFY war leaders, Altarian fleet commanders, and representatives from 100 other species. All of them united in their determination to end the hegemony's reign of terror. "Fellow commanders," Thompson began, "the situation is clear. The hegemony is making their final stand at the nexus point. They are also conducting punishment raids against civilian populations. We have a choice to make." Admiral Reeves, commanding the Mars Defense Fleet, spoke first. "Our intelligence suggests the hegemony has concentrated almost their entire remaining military at the nexus. If we attack them there, we leave the outer worlds defenseless against their punishment fleets. But if we do not attack the nexus," added HFY Commander Sithara, "they will have time to regroup and launch a counteroffensive. They could retake everything we have gained." Thompson looked at each face on the display. These beings had risked everything for freedom. Many had lost their homes, their families, their entire worlds to the hegemony. Now they faced an impossible choice: save the civilians being slaughtered today, or prevent even greater slaughter tomorrow. "There is a third option," Thompson said quietly. "We split our forces. Part of our fleet goes after the punishment fleets to protect the civilians. The rest assault the nexus point with everything we have." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone understood what that meant. Splitting their forces would give them a chance to save some civilian lives, but it would also make the assault on the nexus much more dangerous. They would be fighting the largest hegemony fleet in history with reduced numbers. "Admiral," said Commander Vextor of the Delvac Resistance, his voice grave, "the odds of taking the nexus with a divided fleet are not good." "I know," Thompson replied, "but the odds of the galaxy accepting our victory if we let millions of civilians die while we fight our war are even worse. We did not start this rebellion just to replace one tyranny with another. One by one, the commanders voted. It was unanimous. They would split their forces, knowing that it meant many of them would not survive the final battle." 3 days later, the largest space battle in galactic history began at the nexus point. The structure itself was a marvel of engineering. A city-sized space station surrounded by defensive platforms, shield generators, and weapons batteries. It floated in the center of a nebula that interfered with sensors and communication, making coordination nearly impossible. Thompson commanded the assault fleet from the bridge of the human battleship Liberation. Around her flagship, 800 rebel ships moved in attack formation. Facing them were nearly 5,000 hegemony vessels, including their most advanced warships and their most experienced commanders. At the center of the enemy formation was the hegemony's new flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Order. On its bridge stood High Chancellor Zethmiran himself, determined to personally oversee the destruction of the rebellion. "All ships, begin the attack," Thompson ordered. The battle that followed made the fight at Sol look like a small skirmish. Energy beams lit up space like deadly lightning. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes that could be seen from neighboring star systems. The nebula around the nexus point glowed with the light of 1,000 suns as weapons fire filled the space between the fleets. The rebels fought with desperate courage, but they were vastly outnumbered. Human ships used their speed and maneuverability to strike at enemy weak points before dodging away. Kethri fighters swarmed around the larger hegemony vessels like angry insects. Altarian shield ships protected the smaller rebel craft, while the heavy cruisers traded devastating fire with enemy battleships. But slowly, inevitably, the rebel fleet began to take losses. Ships that had survived the liberation of a dozen worlds were destroyed in minutes. Crews that had fought together for years died together in the cold vacuum of space. "Admiral!" shouted Commander Zhang over the noise of exploding control panels. "We have lost contact with the third attack wing. The Kethri heavy cruiser squadron has been destroyed. We are down to 600 ships." Thompson gripped the arms of her command chair as the Liberation shook under enemy fire. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically to keep their ship operational. Smoke filled the air from damaged systems, and emergency lights cast everything in a red glow. "What about the civilian protection fleets?" she asked. "Reports are coming in," said HFY, her voice tight with emotion. "Admiral Chen's task force saved the colony worlds in the Outer Rim. Commander Thax's ships stopped the attack on New Altaria, but—" She paused, struggling with the words. Admiral Reeves and the Mars fleet were destroyed defending the refugee convoy from Sector 7. Thompson felt the loss like a physical blow. Admiral Reeves had been her mentor, the person who had taught her everything about space warfare. He had died saving civilians he had never met, people whose names he would never know. "Ma'am," called the tactical officer. "Enemy flagship is moving into attack position. They are targeting us directly." On the main screen, the Eternal Order filled their view. The massive ship was twice the size of any human vessel, its crystal hull glowing with deadly energy. As Thompson watched, the enemy flagship's main weapons began to charge. All power to "Forward shields," she ordered. "All ships, concentrate fire on the enemy flagship." The rebel fleet turned as one, focusing their attack on Zethmiran's ship. Hundreds of energy beams and missile volleys struck the Eternal Order's shields, lighting up space with brilliant explosions. But the enemy shields held, and the return fire was devastating. 3 human cruisers were destroyed in the first exchange. A Kethri battleship broke apart under the concentrated fire of the enemy's escort vessels. The rebel fleet was being torn apart. "This is not working," Thompson muttered to herself. They needed a new strategy, something the hegemony would not expect. Then she remembered something from her studies of human military history. Sometimes, when facing impossible odds, the only way to win was to do something so crazy that the enemy could not believe anyone would actually try it. "Commander Zhang," she said suddenly, "can we get close enough to the enemy flagship to deploy boarding parties?" Zhang stared at her in shock. "Admiral, their ship is 3 times our size and heavily defended. A boarding action would be suicide." "Maybe," Thompson replied. "But it would also be the last thing they expect. And if we can capture their flagship, the rest of their fleet might surrender." She opened a channel to the entire rebel fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Thompson. We are going to attempt something that has never been tried in the history of space warfare. We are going to board and capture the enemy flagship." The response was immediate. Every rebel captain volunteered their ship for the assault. Even knowing it was almost certainly a suicide mission, they were willing to try anything to end the war. "Form up on the Liberation," Thompson ordered. "We go in fast and hard, draw their fire while the boarding ships get close enough to deploy assault teams." What followed was the most desperate charge in military history. 200 rebel ships, including converted freighters and civilian vessels, accelerated directly toward the Eternal Order. Enemy fire tore through their ranks, destroying ship after ship, but the survivors kept coming. The Liberation led the charge, her hull glowing red from enemy energy beams. Her shields failed, her armor was melting, and half her systems were offline, but she kept moving forward. Behind her, the remnants of the rebel fleet followed, each ship drawing fire away from the others. At the last moment, when they were close enough to see individual windows on the enemy flagship, Thompson gave the order, "Deploy boarding parties. All assault teams, go now!" Hundreds of small craft launched from the rebel ships, carrying marine units from a dozen different species. Most were destroyed by enemy defensive fire, but some made it through. They crashed into the Eternal Orders, hull like meteorites, burning through the armor with cutting tools and explosives. Thompson led the assault team from the Liberation herself. As they fought their way through the enemy ship's corridors, she could hear the battle raging outside. Ship after ship was being destroyed, but their sacrifice was giving the boarding parties time to reach the enemy's command center. The fighting inside the Eternal Order was brutal. Hegemony security forces had prepared for every possible attack except this one. They had never imagined that anyone would be crazy enough to board their flagship in the middle of the largest space battle in history. Thompson and her team fought their way through the ship's maze-like interior, following maps stolen by rebel spies years earlier. Behind them, other assault teams secured critical systems, engineering, communications, weapons control. Finally, they reached the command center. Thompson stood before the sealed doors of the bridge, knowing that behind them waited the being who had ordered the death of billions, the being who had built an empire on suffering and called it peace. Blow. "The doors," she ordered. The explosives shattered the entrance, and Thompson led her team onto the bridge of the Eternal Order. There, surrounded by his panicking officers, stood High Chancellor Zethmiran. The crystal being's form blazed with desperate light as he saw the humans approaching. "Impossible! You cannot be here! This ship is impregnable!" Thompson raised her weapon, pointing it directly at the hegemony leader. "Nothing is impregnable, Chancellor. We just proved that." Around them, the battle was ending. With their flagship captured and their leader taken prisoner, the remaining hegemony forces began to surrender. The rebels had won, but at a terrible cost. Of the 800 ships that had begun the assault, fewer than 200 survived. Thousands of brave beings had died to end 20,000 years of tyranny. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. As Thompson stood on the bridge of the captured flagship, looking out at the wreckage of the largest fleet battle in history, she knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The hegemony was broken, its leaders captured or fled, its empire in ruins. The age of tyranny was over. The age of freedom was about to begin. 5 years after the Battle of the Nexus Point, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the new Galactic Cooperative Headquarters. The building itself was a symbol of everything the rebellion had fought for, designed by architects from 12 different species, built with materials donated by dozens of worlds, and powered by technology shared freely among all member civilizations. Today was the 5th anniversary of the end of the Hegemony War, and representatives from across the galaxy had gathered to celebrate. But Chen was not here just for ceremony. She had work to do. "The session will now come to order," announced the current speaker, an elderly Kethri named Sithara, who had lost 3 limbs fighting the hegemony, but had never lost her dedication to justice. "We gather today to address the final matter of the hegemony leadership trials." Chen looked across the assembly hall at the faces surrounding her. Humans, Kethri, Altarians, Delvac, Threx, and dozens of other species sat together in mixed groups. There were no separate sections for different races, no hierarchy based on technology or age. Every representative had an equal voice in the decisions that affected the galaxy. It had not been easy to build this new civilization. The collapse of the hegemony had left a power vacuum that could have led to chaos and war. Worlds that had been enemies for millennia suddenly found themselves free to settle old grudges. Species that had been kept apart for thousands of years had to learn how to work together. But humanity had kept its promise. Instead of trying to replace the hegemony as the galaxy's rulers, they had helped create something entirely new, a voluntary association of free worlds based on cooperation rather than domination. The tribunal has reached its verdict in the case of High Chancellor Zeth Miran and the other hegemony leaders, Speaker Sith Ara continued. Ambassador Chen, as the representative who first spoke the word that began our liberation, would you please read the decision? Chen stood and approached the central podium. In her hands was a document that had taken 5 years to prepare, a comprehensive accounting of 20,000 years of oppression, slavery, and genocide. The evidence filled millions of pages, gathered from 1,000 worlds, translated into hundreds of languages. The Galactic Cooperative War Crimes Tribunal finds the defendants guilty of crimes against sentience, she read. The systematic oppression of over 200 species, the destruction of entire civilizations, the enslavement of billions of beings, and the suppression of cultural, technological, and artistic development across the galaxy. She paused, looking up at the assembly. Many of the representatives were survivors of hegemony oppression. Some bore physical scars from slave labor or punishment camps. Others carried psychological wounds that would never fully heal. All of them had lost family, friends, or entire worlds to the hegemony's cruel order. However, Chen continued, the tribunal also recognizes that the cycle of violence must end somewhere. Therefore, the defendants are sentenced to life imprisonment on rehabilitation worlds, where they will work to repair the damage they have caused. They will spend their remaining years helping to rebuild the civilizations they destroyed. There was a murmur through the assembly. Some had wanted harsher punishment, even execution. Others had argued for mercy. The compromise was typically human. Practical justice that focused on healing rather than revenge. Furthermore, Chen read, all former hegemony member species are invited to join the Galactic Cooperative as equal partners, provided they renounce their previous allegiance and accept the principles of voluntary association and mutual respect. This had been the most controversial decision. Many rebel species wanted to punish the former hegemony members as collaborators, but the humans had argued that lasting peace required forgiveness. Most of the hegemony species had been conquered long ago and had simply forgotten what freedom looked like. They deserved a chance to choose a better path. As Chen finished reading the verdict, she thought back to the day 5 years ago when she had stood in a conference room on Luna Station and spoken a single word that changed the galaxy. So much had happened since then. The war had ended with the capture of the Nexus Point, but the real work had begun afterward. Rebuilding destroyed worlds, repatriating displaced populations, establishing new governments based on democratic principles, creating trade networks that benefited everyone instead of just the rulers. It had not always gone smoothly. There had been conflicts between species with ancient grudges. Some worlds had tried to establish their own mini-empires. A few had even attempted to restore the old hegemony system. But each time the cooperative had responded with patience and diplomacy rather than force. They had proved that problems could be solved through cooperation and negotiation. They had shown that strength came from unity, not domination. The results spoke for themselves. Trade was flourishing as species shared their unique technologies and resources. Art and culture were experiencing a renaissance as beings were free to express themselves without fear of censorship. Scientific advancement was accelerating as researchers from different worlds collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under the hegemony's restrictive system. Most importantly, war was becoming a thing of the past. When the most powerful military alliance in galactic history chose to solve problems through peaceful means, other civilizations quickly learned to do the same. The session is now closed, announced Speaker Sithara. May this be the last time. We must sit in judgment of those who would oppress the free beings of the galaxy. As the representatives began to file out of the assembly hall, Chen found herself approached by a familiar figure. Admiral Sarah Thompson, now retired from military service and serving as the Director of Cooperative Security, walked up with a smile. "Another successful session," Thompson said, "though I still think some of the delegates wanted to throw Zethmarin out an airlock." Chen laughed. "I cannot blame them, but we had to be better than the hegemony. That was always the point." They walked together toward the great windows that looked out over the capital city of New Geneva. The city was a marvel of cooperative engineering, with buildings that accommodated dozens of different body types and environmental needs. In the parks below, children from 100 different species played together, their parents watching with the relaxed confidence of beings who no longer feared for their children's future. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had chosen differently?" Thompson asked. "If we had just submitted to the hegemony 5 years ago?" Chen considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I look out at this city, at all those children, playing together, and I remember why we made the choice we did. Freedom is never the easy path, but it is always the right one." "Speaking of freedom," Thompson said, "I have some news that might interest you. The exploration ships have found something interesting in the Outer Rim territories. Another lost civilization? Better. We found a species that is just discovering space travel. They are about where humanity was 300 years ago. The question is, what do we do about it?" Chen smiled. This was exactly the kind of problem the old hegemony would have solved with conquest and forced integration. But the cooperative had developed a different approach. "We do what we should have been done for us," she said. "We make contact carefully. We offer friendship and assistance. We let them choose their own path, and if they want to join us, we welcome them as equals. No ultimatums? No ultimatums. No demands for submission, no threats of corrective measures. Just an open hand and an offer of friendship." Thompson nodded approvingly. "I think they will like that better than the alternative." As the two women continued to talk, the sun set over New Geneva, casting long shadows across the city. In those shadows, beings from across the galaxy went about their daily lives, working, playing, creating, dreaming, and planning for a future they could choose for themselves. 5 years ago, the galaxy had held its breath when humanity defied the hegemony. Today, it breathed freely for the first time in 20,000 years. The word that started it all still echoed in the history books and in the hearts of free beings everywhere. No. A simple word that carried the weight of every oppressed soul who had ever dreamed of freedom. But the story did not end with that word. It continued with millions of other words, laws that protected the rights of all. Sentient beings, treaties that prevented war and promoted cooperation, stories and songs and poems that celebrated the diversity of galactic civilization. Most importantly, it continued with the word that children across the galaxy learned in their first lessons about history and government. Yes. Yes to freedom. Yes to cooperation. Yes to the idea that every being in the galaxy deserved the right to choose their own destiny. In the years that followed, when new species were discovered or when conflicts arose between worlds, the beings of the galaxy would remember the choice that humanity had made. They would remember that when faced with an impossible demand from those who claimed to be their superiors, a small blue world had spoken a single word that changed everything. And in that memory, they would find the courage to speak their own. Words of defiance against tyranny, of welcome to strangers, and of hope for a better tomorrow. The galaxy was free, and it would remain free as long as beings remembered the lesson that humanity had taught. That freedom is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It is something that lives in the heart of every sentient being, waiting for the courage to speak that one simple, powerful word, no. But more than that, the galaxy had learned that after saying no to oppression, there was something even more important to say. The word that built civilizations, that created alliances, that turned former enemies into friends and strangers into family. Yes. Yes to freedom. Yes to cooperation. Yes to a future where every being could choose their own path among the stars. The word that shook stars had become the foundation for a new age of peace. And in the light of distant suns, children of 100 different species played together, dreaming of the day when they too might explore the galaxy as free beings in a free universe. The dawn of a new age had become the bright day of a better tomorrow.